Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Question?
sure. So, Tom, I'm just thinking also, I actually do write backtests for AUM which are very large in a sense that there are liquidity constraints involved. So, and those backtests are very sophisticated, which has liquidity constraints built in them. And so,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
do you have a way of making them symbolize or have some sort of liquidity constraint included in the sort of backtest you have written out?
Yeah, once you start dealing with liquidity constraints, backtests are generally a lot more complex. Now, one of the things you can do is because what you can see here in this simple data, you actually have volume data. So you have, it tells you what the trading volume is. And so usually what you could say is, well, if I submit a trade of a certain size and I have a certain amount of daily volume, so let's say I send a trade that is 1% of the daily volume. I can, for example, make an estimate of how much I might move the market, and then basically add a little bit of trading cost depending on the amount of volume I have, and then move the market. So I need to build effectively a little model, a sort of a liquidity model, and say, with this percentage of daily volume that I trade in one trade, I move the market by X, and if I submit another percentage, I move the market by Y, and then depending on this, I can say, well, I lose a few more, if I trade say 1% of daily volume, I lose like 5 ticks, and if I trade 2% of daily volume, I lose 10 ticks or something like this. So I can build like a little model around that. Obviously, this is not particularly sophisticated. And what I would do is probably, if I do this, just be extremely conservative and probably add more losses into my model than I would normally do. But that's probably the best you can do in such a simple model. Obviously, if you want to really use liquidity, you need tick data and you need the order book, and then you need to see, well, how far I sweep the order book. And I'm sure Pranas has a lot more he uses a lot of this in his trading models, so he would understand very well how this works. Now I've done this as well, but as you said, this becomes increasingly more complex. So today was really just a super simple way of backtesting and a super simple idea for people who have never done this before. But when it comes to this, then there is no more easy way. But actually, what I found is when you build little models and you, for example, look at the original data, and you go through, say, a couple of months of data, and you see how big trades move the market up and down, and you build a little bit of a model, and then you take that model and incorporate it in a simple backtest. What that does is it makes your backtest much, much, much quicker. So for example, if you want to do a parameter sweep for your backtest and you want to optimize the parameters of your backtest a little bit, having a much simpler model often helps you to go through this much quicker, and that can make the difference between running a back or a parameter optimization backtest for a month or for 5 minutes. So I think it's sometimes really handy to build those simple models to give you a better idea of what you can do. And again, backtests can never be super precise, in that obviously you can increase the levels of precision more and more and more. But as you increase the level of precision in a backtest, then the level of complexity of your backtest will go up exponentially. So there's always the question of how much do you actually need to know how precisely need to know the results of your backtest, because sometimes backtests are so imprecise anyway that a little bit of give doesn't really make that much difference. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. It does. I have another thing to ask you that.
Sure.
So these kind of simple back tests, they are actually intuitive when you're building or fishing for ideas. I think they are quick
Mm-hmm.
way to gauge if that works.
Yep.
But I think it's very intuitive to look them for instruments which have a continuous series of prices. Like equities are a good example. Forex, I think, is makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
You can make them work for futures also, but
Yep.
for options, it's very tricky. I've tried to work for them options also. Say, do you have any idea like how to go about using these kind of ideas for options?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for futures, one of the things you can do is you can create what you call a continuous future. So there's quite a few ways to do this. So quite often, what people do is for futures, they then when the roll comes along, you actually introduce a rolling function, and then you create a continuous future, and you can actually backtest futures using this continuous future. So there's various ways of doing this. There's an additive way or multiplicative way to effectively align the futures contracts with each other. And then, of course, you have to be careful when you do the trades. You want to align the futures prices, but then if you if you have the futures expiry, you have to make sure that you're not rolling a trade over the futures expiry into the new one, and you actually discount or disregard the roll return of the future. So that could be a problem, but it's still possible to backtest futures continuously. Now with options, options is a whole nother kettle of fish. We're actually running quite a lot of backtests on options. Now, with options, it's really, you really need to go and you go, okay, what is my option strategy? And with options, every strategy is so different from each other that and when you write backtests, you need to really regard all the fine-grained details of that option strategy and how you move or how you roll options contracts, for example, how you get out of one and move into the next one, and so on. So with options, whilst with futures is still kind of relatively straightforward, with options, it becomes a lot more complex, and you need to like really go through all the option chains and all the different contracts. And so in our case, we look actually quite a lot into using options for tail risk hedging. And when it comes to this, every time you get into new options contracts, you have to really just run another optimization to find the right options portfolios every time you go into it. So you get the data to exit the other contract, and then you enter the new contract and so on. So yeah, so it becomes quite complex. But having said that, the complexity is not so much in the, let's say, the mathematics of it. Like options mathematics is obviously complex, but it doesn't have to be that complex. But the bookkeeping effectively in an option strategy backtest, that's what's really hard. Keeping track of all the different contracts, all the different expiries and so on, and then rolling them over into the next. And so it's more like a finicky programming bookkeeping task rather than a complexity task as such. But then obviously bookkeeping introduces a lot of complexity as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm quite familiar with options backtests, and I can tell you usually we've just used here like 40 lines or so. When you write options backtests, they are more like 30 or 40x at that size. So they're usually at least 1,000 lines or so, or more, probably more. So they're generally quite long. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, Tom, it does. I think it would be helpful if you could have a session, just maybe a dummy options and the backtest if you can do that also. That
Yeah. One of the things I found
because,
sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, there's not much literature on how to backtest options. I would have to say that futures, yeah, you can find but options there is.
There's not many shortcuts actually. And the other issue is getting good options data, right? So if you have good historical options data, that's great, because what that means is you can really just simply go, you just go through the data, and normally they're in these nested dictionaries. And so you just need to extract the right contracts and make sure, you pick them correctly. But if you build models for options, so if you say build an implied volatility model with a volatility smile, and then you calculate the options prices based on some sort of implied volatility model, then things become incredibly tricky, because you need to actually figure out where your options contracts might be. What's the granularity of your prices? Is your implied volatility model reasonably correct? It's actually kind of tricky to figure that out. So I would say the complexity of that becomes almost intractable. Whereas if you have good options data, it's still kind of manageable. So it depends. And then, of course, options, when you buy them far out of the money, they're generally not particularly liquid. That poses another problem, which can be an issue. Luckily, we deal mostly with quite liquid options contracts, so we don't necessarily run into this problem too much. All right. Is there any other questions?
Sure. No. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, Claudio.
Oh, yes. My question is just what type of prices do I have to take into account whenever I backtest?
Say it again.
Prices. Yeah. What price from the OH? I mean,
oh yeah, okay.
Right now we use it adjusted close. Okay,
yeah.
But what if we use open prices?
Yeah. So okay. So this is actually a really good question, because this is really quite tricky. Now, when you look at really quite short backtests of minute data, usually the adjusted prices just they account for splits and dividends. And so, for example, in Yahoo Finance, for the open, high, low, close prices, splits are already factored in, as far as I know, for most contracts, but sometimes they forget to factor in the splits as well. So it's not always perfect, but most of the time it is. At least for the S&P 500, I would say 90% of them don't have splits. But for the open, high, low, close prices, the dividends are not accounted for. So if you do really long back tests, you just got to be a little bit careful whether it matters to you that you sometimes get dividends around the reporting date, and that could skew your backtest a little bit. And you just have to see how much it skews your backtest. One thing you could do is, for example, you could look at the actual close prices and then the adjusted close prices. And when is a discrepancy, you know that there was a corporate action taken, a dividend taken into account, and then you can calculate the difference between them, and then you can actually back calculate the open, high, and low prices and adjust them for those dividends, as well as you can adjust it open and adjust it high and adjust it low. That's one way of doing it. It's a bit fiddly, but it can be done. I've done it before. It's not too tricky. Now, when you use simple stuff like I did here with 2 moving averages, all you need is the close price. But then, let's say you do you run a different indicator, or you run, say, candlestick patterns. You want to trade on candlestick patterns. You actually need open, high, low, close prices to do this. Or if you run different types of indicators, often they require high, low, and close price as well. So you need to look at this data. And if you do this over a long time period, you then need to decide for yourself whether the dividend matters in your trading strategy or not. But this is really a decision you have to make on a case-by-case basis. So there's no hard and fast rule how you would do that. Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay, cool. Anything else? Anyone? All right. Well, there's no more questions. There's just one thing I wanted to say with this backtest here. So with this backtest, what we assumed is effectively, as soon as we get the trading signal, we actually trade at the same price that we get the trading signal. So that's the assumption that we inherently make in this backtest that I've shown you. So this is really important to realize. Now, this is totally impossible to do. The best thing you could do is, so for example, if you wanted a strategy, if I wanted to implement that strategy live, what I need to do is, I need to perhaps get my trading signal a second or so before the closing time, and then submit, for example, a market order just at the close. And then I basically get a trade that is close enough to what my backtest shows me, okay? But it's never going to be perfect. And so we need to take this into account as well. Oh yeah, and there's also another thing, actually, Claudio, that relates to your question. Now, for example, when we run a backtest, let's say on the US market, and we use the open prices as a price, we're never going to be able to achieve this open price. Why? Because normally what happens is at the open, our prices are extremely illiquid. So we have really, really wide spreads at the open, and usually a very, very big volatility. So whatever price you see in your data is not going to be anywhere near the open price you can achieve. So this is really important to remember. So oftentimes when you backtest, the prices that you see and the actual prices that you can get can be quite different. And this is particularly true for the open price. For the closed prices, it's a little bit different. The liquidity is a lot higher and the volatility is nowhere near as bad as at the open. It does increase towards the close a little bit, but it's not too bad. But you could also submit a market on close order. So you actually get a price similar to the close price that is reported. So just as word of caution, if you use open prices for trading, don't think you can actually achieve them. That's usually quite impossible to do. Okay, so if no one else has a question, if you have another question, make sure you mute yourself right now. Otherwise, I close this evening for today. I just want to say again, if you want the notebook, go to the link that has been provided in the message box. If you're more interested in more advanced backtesting in terms of using daily strategies and fine-tuning them, and then also running different or backtesting different types of strategies, I'll put out a course in a few weeks where I discuss this in really great length. We already have the first part of the course actually on our website, but this is still experimental. It's not 100% fine-tuned, but if you're interested, you can also contact me and we can talk about it. The other thing is I'm intending to run another one of these maybe in 2 or 3 weeks on factor models. So if you're not familiar yet with factor models, this is usually a big topic in asset management. And what I'll show you is obviously not what specific factor models you should trade, but what I show you is how you could implement a factor model and how this would look like to be, or what the factor model actually is, and how you could implement it in a trading strategy. So it's going to be a lot of quant stuff and programming again. So if you're interested in that, or if you have any other suggestions of stuff that I could present here within an hour or so, then let me know. There might be something you might be interested in. And if I understand this topic, there's a lot of stuff I don't understand, obviously, but if I understand it, I can present it to you as well. Okay, so thanks very much for listening in, and I hope you enjoyed this. If you enjoy it, give us a little like somewhere or whatever, and we really appreciate it. And I really hope to see you maybe in a few weeks. Look out for this. So maybe we do factor models, and I see you then. Thanks so much, and bye-bye. Bye.